Right after I'd finished fighting through 17 hours of labor, exhausted, raw, still trembling from the pain, my mother-in-law said, "That baby can't be our blood." For a second, everything stilled. Even the soft whoosh of the air vent seemed to pause. The rhythmic beeping from the IV behind me felt suddenly louder, the only sound besides a faint newborn's cry echoing from a nearby room. I instinctively pulled Luna closer to my chest, her warmth grounding me as if she too had heard the shift in the air. Ethan turned toward me slowly, as if trying to recalibrate, like he'd just been dropped into someone else's family drama without a script. I watched his brows draw together, confusion forming like fog across his features. It was the look of a man grappling with a question that had no business being asked in the first place. And yet it lingered on his face. But me? I didn't flinch. I didn't rise to meet her disdain. Instead, I offered a smile. Not the fragile, rehearsed kind that begs for peace, but the kind that's forged from grit, the kind that says, "You've tried this before, and this time I came prepared." Because what Margot Monroe didn't know, what neither Ethan nor anyone else in that antiseptic lavender-scented room realized, was that I was already 10 steps ahead of her. I'd anticipated this. Maybe not the exact words, but the sentiment. Oh yes, I knew it would come wrapped in her signature ice and served with surgical precision. What she hadn't counted on was that I wouldn't crumble, not this time. Because the truth, I already had it. And it wasn't the version she had rehearsed in her head all these months. Then, just as the silence stretched a beat too long, the door clicked open. A nurse stepped aside, allowing in a man in a crisp white coat. Dr. Patel holding a manila folder, his expression unreadable. And what followed, what spilled from that manila folder in hushed tones and clinical terms, was something none of us were ready for. When my husband, Ethan, and I first met, we were just two broke college kids who happened to land at the same scratched-up library table at the University of Michigan. He had this restless energy about him, always tapping his pen, bouncing one knee, flipping pages before finishing a paragraph. It was like his brain was constantly 5 steps ahead of his body. Me, I was the still water to his storm. Quiet, careful, always watching before speaking. The kind of girl who took notes not just in class but in life. I think that's why we worked. He made the world lighter, made me laugh when I didn't even know I needed to, and I somehow helped him slow down long enough to breathe. After we graduated, we packed our lives into a secondhand hatchback and moved to Chicago. The city felt big and fast, but we clung to each other and found a rhythm. We got married in a courthouse on a rainy Thursday, just my dad and Maddie standing with us holding umbrellas and wiping their eyes. Ethan's parents didn't come. Margot claimed it was too rushed, that proper Monroes planned weddings with catering and linen samples and the right people watching. But we didn't wait. We couldn't. Sometimes love doesn't ask for permission. It just needs to happen. I won't pretend Margot's absence didn't sting. She didn't hurl insults, didn't throw tantrums. That wasn't her style. No, Margot's sharpest weapon was her silence, measured, precise, meant to make you question your own worth. And when she did speak, it was with the kind of sweetened poison only experience could brew. "Are you sure she's ready for this life, Ethan? Or she seems sensitive. You need stability, not volatility." Still, we kept trying. Every holiday, every birthday, we sent invitations. Sometimes she accepted, sometimes she didn't. Ethan always said, "Give her time. She'll come around." And I wanted to believe him. God, I did. When we finally started trying for a baby, it felt like a clean page. Like maybe Margot would soften, maybe this would bridge something broken. But then came the first miscarriage, and the second, and with them came silence from Margot once again. After the second loss, doctors confirmed what I'd feared: I had endometriosis. Conceiving wouldn't be impossible, but it would be an uphill battle. Every cycle turned into a quiet war. Every negative test landed like a blow I couldn't block. My body felt like it was betraying me over and over, and Margot. She offered Ethan a single line. "Maybe it's just not meant to be." She didn't say it to me. She never did. Her words were always aimed around me like I wasn't quite real. But my dad, Frank, he held the line. A man of few words and fewer complaints, he called me every Sunday without fail, just to check in. Sometimes he'd stay on the line through my tears and say nothing but, "You're stronger than this, kid. Maddie, ever the soul of warmth from her nursing school dorm in Austin, would send me memes and 3 a.m. selfies with captions like, "Thinking of you even while drowning in pharmacology." I'd clutch my phone in the dark, reading those texts with tears slipping silently into my pillow. Then, just as we were finally talking about adoption, I noticed I was late. I didn't take a test right away, I couldn't bear another white space. But a week passed, then another, and something in me whispered that this time was different. I finally took the test alone in the bathroom, hands shaking, heart thundering, and there it was. Positive. I walked into the bathroom where Ethan was brushing his teeth, and I held it up like a secret I couldn't say out loud. He looked at it, then at me, and dropped his toothbrush into the sink. We laughed, cried, kissed, still half foamed at the mouth like two kids who'd been handed the most fragile gift in the world. The pregnancy was hard. I was sick from the start, plagued by nerve pain and nausea that seemed to last from sunrise to moonlight. I held my breath at every ultrasound, convinced that Joy might vanish at any moment. But every time there, she was our daughter. Her heartbeat wild and determined, pulsing like a promise, "I'm still here." Keep going. Margot didn't send flowers, didn't call to say she was happy. Just a brief voicemail one afternoon. "Let me know the gender." That was it. And then after 17 hours of labor, 17 hours of clenching and crying and believing I might split in half, I brought Luna into the world. She came out red-faced, squirmy, furious at the light, with a mop of jet-black hair and those deep hazel eyes that seemed to scan the room with suspicion. When the nurse handed her to me, I forgot about the pain. I forgot about Margot. All I could see was her. She blinked up at me like she already knew I was the safest place she'd ever be. Ethan cried harder than I did, pressing his lips to my forehead, whispering over and over, "She's perfect. You did it. She's here." The next day, our room overflowed. There were balloons taped to IV poles, nurses slipping in with warm smiles, my dad beaming on FaceTime, and Maddie crying happy tears through a choppy video call. Even Margot showed up. She swept into the room dressed head to toe in beige, not a crease out of place, as if she'd walked straight out of a department store window and not into a maternity ward. Her hair, her posture, everything about her screamed control. She gave me the briefest glance, barely a flicker, and then fixed her eyes on Luna, who lay sleeping in my arms, bundled in hospital-issued cotton and the smell of newborn skin. That was when I saw it. It wasn't obvious. Margot never let her mask slip more than an inch, but I saw the faint crease of her brow, the tightening around her mouth. Doubt. Judgment. A silent calculation, like she was piecing together an equation she didn't want to believe. Like Luna didn't match the mental blueprint she'd already drawn of what a Monroe baby should look like. She said nothing at first, just kept staring like the room was frozen, and we were all waiting for her permission to breathe. Something about her silence, about the sheer weight of it, made the hairs on my arms stand up. My instincts kicked in. I gently passed Luna to Ethan and leaned back against the pillows, a quiet signal that I was bracing for impact. Margot stepped forward, arms crossed like a verdict had already been reached, and then without flinching, she said it. "This baby, she can't be our blood." The sentence dropped like a trapdoor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was like someone had opened a window in winter, and all the warmth in the room got sucked out in an instant. The soft hum of the IV machine, the distant shuffling in the hallway, everything dulled under the weight of her words. Ethan froze mid-step, stuck between the bassinet and the recliner beside my bed. Even the nurse who'd been checking the monitors arched her eyebrows slightly, then quietly slipped out of the room like she'd seen enough family explosions to know when to exit early. I turned my gaze on Margot. She wasn't angry. If she had been, maybe I could have yelled back, matched fire with fire. But no, she was composed, detached. She looked at me like she was stating a medical fact, like she was diagnosing a fracture I hadn't felt. Ethan finally managed to speak, his voice hesitant, paper thin. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Margot didn't look at him at first. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice as if she were revealing something scandalous at a cocktail party. "Look at her, Ethan. Just look. Hazel eyes, olive-toned skin. She looks nothing like you, nothing like me, nothing like any Monroe I've ever known. I don't know who this child belongs to, but she's not part of this family." I sat there stunned, not because I didn't see it coming, but because she'd actually said it. Aloud. In a hospital room while I was still healing from the most excruciating, miraculous act of my life. I had stitches that hadn't even been checked yet, breasts sore from feeding a life I'd carried inside me, and this woman chose now to disown my child. And Ethan, God help me. Ethan turned to me. Not accusing, not certain, but questioning. Like somewhere some tiny part of him was letting the poison in. That look, that moment, that's what broke me. Not the accusation, the doubt. His eyes didn't need words. They asked the question his mouth was too afraid to say, is there a chance? And that was what hurt the most. I had never betrayed him, not once, not even in a thought. I had endured every cold dinner, every backhanded comment, every time Margot pretended I didn't exist at family events. I had loved this man with everything I had fought for our marriage, bled for our daughter, and now his silence was carving into me deeper than any insult ever could. I swallowed the lump in my throat. When I spoke, my voice was steady, sharper than I expected. You're not actually giving this weight, are you? He didn't answer. Margot turned her gaze back to me, folding her arms tighter across her chest. I'm protecting my son, and this family. If you have nothing to hide, then a paternity test shouldn't be a problem. It wasn't a question, it was a dare. I looked down at Luna, her tiny chest rising and falling against the blanket, one hand curled near her cheek, completely unaware of the storm circling her. Something inside me shifted then, not rage, not even fear. Something colder, clearer, like ice locking into place. I raised my eyes to Margot and said, fine, do the test. But when it proves you wrong, and it will, I hope you remember that today, the day your granddaughter was born, you chose to doubt her before you even held her. Ethan stepped toward us, voice caught in his throat. Claire. Let's not turn this into a fight, okay? Margot offered me a smile, tight polished, almost victorious. Good. I'll arrange everything. And with that, she turned and left the room as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb and walked away from the debris. The second she was gone, it was like the room exhaled. The machines beeped again, the fluorescent light buzzed back into focus. Ethan sank into the chair beside my bed, staring at Luna with a heaviness I couldn't read. You know she's wrong, right? He asked softly. I nodded, I do. He paused, eyes flickering with something more fragile than doubt. Do you... He didn't have to say more. That silence between us spoke volumes. I turned my face away, not because I didn't love him, but because in that moment something more primal took hold. I had to protect my daughter. I had to protect myself. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. The next morning, a social worker stopped by. She mentioned a third-party lab that did same-day testing. She offered to coordinate. Ethan agreed. So did I. Margot, of course, insisted on being there when the results came in. That was the kind of control she needed to witness the ending she thought she already knew. That night, I held Luna close and whispered into the softness of her hair, let them question. Let them doubt. I know who you are. I know every heartbeat, every stretch mark, every craving. You're mine, Luna, no matter what they say. By the time dawn broke over the city, I knew one thing for sure. I was done being quiet. I barely slept that night. Luna was restless little stretches of sleep interrupted by soft whimpers, the kind that sent me upright even before her cries reached full volume. And every time I closed my eyes, I heard Margot's voice. This baby can't be our blood. Over and over again, like a crack running through the wall of my sanity, growing deeper every time I tried to ignore it. Ethan was curled in the corner chair, hunched beneath his hoodie like a kid trying to disappear. That recliner might have been the most uncomfortable piece of furniture ever created, but he hadn't complained. He looked utterly spent. Not just physically, not just from being up through the delivery, but emotionally. Worn thin from the impossible tug-of-war between the woman he married and the woman who raised him. As the first light crept through the hospital window, turning the walls from sterile gray to something almost warm, I buzzed the nurse. I asked when we could be discharged. I needed out. I needed my bed, the creak of our old floorboards air that didn't smell like antiseptic. I needed to be somewhere Margot hadn't poisoned with her doubt. But before we packed, I picked up the phone. I called the genetic testing lab the hospital had mentioned. I didn't wait for Ethan to bring it up. I didn't ask if he was okay with it. I didn't need permission to clear my name. I scheduled the appointment, meet Ethan and Luna, the whole truth on record. When I told Ethan, he looked up slowly, eyes heavy with sleeplessness and the weight of everything unspoken. Are you sure we need to do this? He asked. You know the truth. I know the truth. This is just my mom stirring the pot again. I stared at him steady, then let her drown in it. Let her sit in a room while a stranger in a white coat hands her the truth printed in black and white, stripped of opinion or prejudice. He didn't argue, he just nodded once. Okay, we'll go. The lab was tucked inside a bland professional building downtown, one of those places with too many elevators and not enough windows. Inside it was quiet and sterile, the kind of place where the walls are designed not to echo bad news. We sat in a cramped waiting area beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Luna dozed in her carrier between us, unaware that her parentage was on trial. A young technician entered. She looked like she could have been Maddie's classmate and explained the process. Simple, she said. Swab the inside of the cheek. No pain, no blood, just precision. Ethan went first, then me, and finally Luna. She stirred a little when the swab touched her mouth, but didn't cry. She was calm, blissfully unaware. Margot hadn't come, though. She'd made a point of saying she'd be there when the results were revealed. She claimed to trust the process. What she really wanted was a stage, some dramatic vindicating moment where she could say, "I told you so," with the flair of a matinee actress. She wanted a revelation, a scandal, a confession. But what none of us expected, what even she didn't plan for, was what the results would really show. We went home to wait. I fed Luna, changed her, held her against my chest as the sun shifted across the bedroom wall. I could feel her heartbeat through her onesie, tiny but strong, syncing with mine like a tether. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry anymore. Just tired. Not of being her mother, never that, but of having to prove it. 2 days later, the lab called. Ethan answered first. I watched his face change as he listened. Then he silently handed me the phone. His hands trembled. A woman on the other end explained that the results were ready, but she asked us to come in person. There was, as she put it, a secondary finding we need to explain. Secondary finding. 2 words. That's all it took for something to seize in my chest. I told her we'd be there. This time, Margot came. 15 minutes early, naturally. She walked into the lobby like she was entering a courtroom, on camera, sunglasses, on coat, perfectly pressed. I didn't speak to her. Neither did Ethan, except for the half-hug he gave her out of old habit. The 3 of us walked in together, silent. The technician from before met us at the door, but now she was joined by someone new, a genetic counselor. That detail alone made my stomach turn. People don't bring in counselors for simple confirmations. Counselors mean complexity, implications. We were led to a small consultation room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. We sat, me, Ethan, Margot, our knees almost touching under the table. Luna slept in her carrier at my feet. The technician opened the folder slowly, like she was diffusing something volatile. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. We've completed the analysis, she said, eyes scanning our faces. And yes, Luna is biologically Ethan's daughter, without question. The relief that swept over me was so immediate I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath. I looked at Ethan. His shoulders sagged with release. He turned to Margot. But Margot didn't move. No apology, no shock. Her expression was stone, like she hadn't heard a word. Then the counselor spoke. Her voice was gentler, careful. However, she said, while reviewing Ethan's genetic data, we uncovered something unexpected. And it's something we believe you all deserve to know. The room dropped into silence again, real heavy silence. The counselor's voice was quiet, almost clinical, but there was no mistaking the weight of her words. According to our findings, she began glancing down at the folder. Ethan is not biologically related to the woman he believes is his mother. The words didn't land like a whisper. They hit the room like a sudden impact, swift, shattering, impossible to prepare for. Even Margot flinched. Not dramatically, not enough for most people to notice. But I saw it, the subtle stiffening in her posture, the tiny quiver at the corner of her lip. Her composure cracked just for a second. The silence that followed was thick and unbearable. The sentence seemed to echo in the walls. Ethan is not biologically related to the woman he believes is his mother. Margot blinked once slowly, as though she were trying to translate what she'd just heard into a language she understood. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice brittle, cracking like dry glass. "What did you just say?" The counselor, still composed, but visibly more cautious now, repeated the findings, this time with softened tone. "We checked the maternal DNA comparison twice, Mrs. Monroe. There's no biological relationship between you and Ethan. The genetic markers are conclusive. We've confirmed them with a repeat test." I turned to Ethan. He looked like someone had pressed pause on his entire being. Still, silent, no blinking, no questions, just stopped. His skin had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of his chair as if the ground beneath him might tilt at any second. Margot shook her head, her voice tightening, rising into something sharp. That can't be right. I was there when he was born. I remember holding him. I remember everything." Her voice faltered on that last word. The counselor nodded slowly, carefully. I understand how difficult this is to hear. But scientifically, it's very clear. Ethan and Luna share a biological father-daughter relationship. That's been verified beyond doubt. But the maternal comparison between you and Ethan... She paused, searching for gentle language, shows no match. Margot looked like the floor had disappeared beneath her. For the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't directing the conversation. She wasn't orchestrating the mood in the room. She was off script, untethered. So you're telling me I'm not his mother? She asked almost in a whisper. The counselor took a breath. We're not saying you didn't raise him. We're saying you didn't give birth to him. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was rough, low, like he'd scraped it from somewhere deep. Then who did? No one had an answer. There was only more silence, hollow and terrifying. The counselor explained that it was likely Ethan had been switched at birth. It was rare, but it happened usually due to clerical errors, hospital mismanagement, or tragic oversight. They couldn't say when or how. All they had was the truth staring up at them from the lab report. I looked at Margot again. This time I didn't see the woman who once made me feel small at the dinner table. I didn't see her judgment or her sharp tongue. I saw a woman unraveling. Her pride was gone, replaced by something harder to look at: grief and fear. Because this wasn't just a plot twist in our story. This was a fault line in hers. Ethan stared at the floor, his voice trembling. You raised me, and I'm not even... Margot stood up so fast the chair squeaked against the tile. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Her voice was breaking, but her eyes were fierce. I don't care what that folder says. I am your mother. I rocked you through colic. I stayed up all night when you had the flu. I cheered from the sidelines and cried when you left for college. I gave you everything I had. So don't you stand there and reduce that to a strand of DNA. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes glassy with tears. Then why, he asked quietly, did you try to tear mine apart? Margot said nothing. For once, she had no retort. And that was when I finally spoke. Luna is yours, I said, my voice steady. Whether you want her or not because of her blood, but because she's your son's daughter. Because she was born into this family, the one we've been trying so hard to make work. I turned to the counselor. Are we done here? She nodded gently. We'll provide official copies of the results. If you'd like, we can refer you to counseling or legal services. We're done, Ethan interrupted softly. We left the office together. I carried Luna, who remained peacefully asleep, her tiny hand clutching the edge of her blanket like nothing in the world could touch her. Ethan walked beside me, holding the test results in one hand, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the windshield of his thoughts. Margot didn't ride with us. She walked to her car alone. She didn't try to reclaim the last word. She didn't turn to dismiss or defend. She just looked at Ethan and whispered, I didn't know. And for the first time in all the years I'd known her, I believed her. When we got home, Ethan went straight into the nursery. He knelt beside Luna's crib and reached in, tracing a finger along her soft arm, then tucking the blanket a little tighter around her. I joined him, sitting on the rug beside him in silence. What are you thinking? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then finally he shook his head. I don't know who I am anymore, he said. But I know who she is. And I know who you are. And maybe that's enough to start over. We sat there like that for a long time, me, him, Luna, wrapped in a kind of stillness that didn't feel like shock or grief. It felt like healing, like possibility. Maybe family isn't about origin stories. Maybe it's about choice, the people you fight for, the love you protect. And sometimes the silence that comes after truth isn't destruction, it's reconstruction. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No texts from Margot, no phone calls. It was like something between her and Ethan had shattered, and neither of them knew how to gather the pieces. But I wasn't watching her anymore. I had Luna. Every sigh she made in her sleep, every midnight, feeding every gurgle of joy, reminded me of what was real. Not the test results, not the accusations, just her. One night I sat in the nursery with Luna dozing in my arms, the sound machine humming waves in the background. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. He smiled faintly. She looks like you when she sleeps, he said. I looked down. You think so? Same stubborn little chin. Same furrowed brow when she dreams. He stepped closer, sat beside me. I don't know who my biological mother is. I don't know if I want to know. But I do know this: you never made me question if I belonged to you. Not once. And that more than anything was what I held on to. Not the paper, not the name, but the choice and the truth that came with it. After that day at the lab, we didn't talk much about Margot. It wasn't some decision we made out loud, it was just the quiet that came when the dust finally settled and no one knew what to say anymore. She reached out once, maybe 2 weeks later, in an email that was exactly 3 paragraphs long. It wasn't dramatic. No long confessions or pleas for forgiveness, just a careful mix of apology and self-preservation. She wrote that she was sorry for questioning Luna's place in the family, but that the DNA test had rattled her more than she expected, that it shook something deep in her, something she hadn't prepared to confront. She said she needed space to process. I read it once, then again. And then I closed the tab and never replied. Not because I was angry, but because I was also processing. Not just what had happened at the lab, but the accumulation of every quiet dismissal, every backhanded comment, every holiday where I tried too hard and was still made to feel like too little. Years of twisting myself into more polite, more presentable, more palatable versions just to be tolerated. And in the end, the moment I finally stood up for Luna, for myself, for everything I knew was true, that's when the real truth came out. Funny how it works like that. Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits watching to see when you're ready to hear it. A few weeks later, I started therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand why I had spent so much of my life craving approval from someone who never truly saw me. Why I kept trying to build bridges across rivers that had no banks. It wasn't easy peeling back layers I didn't know I had, but it helped. Slowly. I realized Margot had never been the source of my pain. She was just the mirror, a reflection of every voice that ever made me feel like I had to shrink to fit. And once I stopped looking into that mirror for validation, I realized I didn't need it anymore. Not to mother, not to belong, not to be whole. Ethan and I didn't bounce back instantly. There were nights we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, eating in silence, feeling the weight of too many unsaid things. There were conversations that started with, "I don't know if I can do this," and ended with, "But I want to." But day after day, choice by choice, we found each other again. That's what love is. Not the spark, not the whirlwind, but the willingness to rebuild when everything's come apart. My dad flew in to meet Luna when she was 3 months old. He stood in our living room holding her in those big, weathered hands of his like she was made of glass and gold. "She's got your eyes," he said with a smile I hadn't seen in years. "And your fire, too." Maddie sent us a scrapbook from Texas, handmade full of baby photos I'd texted her at 2 a.m., quotes scribbled in gel pen, little notes folded into the pages like secrets. On the cover, she'd written in thick marker, "Family isn't blood, it's proof." I hung it on the nursery wall right above Luna's crib. Margot hasn't met Luna again. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. And that's okay. I don't measure our life by who shows up out of obligation anymore. I don't lose sleep over who hasn't earned their seat at our table. Because now I know better. You don't need someone else's permission to live your truth. You don't need their approval to love, to raise a child, to build a life worth fighting for. You just need clarity and courage, and the heart to stand your ground even when the earth shifts under you. That's what Luna gave me. The moment she arrived, she gave me a reason to stop shrinking, to take up space, to draw a line and say, "This is my family, and it doesn't need to look like yours to be real." I look at her now, one hand always tucked into her blanket, those brilliant hazel eyes already taking in the world with a kind of fierce wonder, and I feel a peace I never thought I'd earn. Not a perfect peace, not without ache, but something truer, something grounded. This is our family, messy, unscripted, resilient, ours, and no one, not biology, not doubt, not even Margot, can take that away. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever had to defend your truth, stand your ground when no one else did, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment. I read everyone. And if something in this story helped you see your own a little clearer, gave you a little strength, or just made you feel less alone, consider giving it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to know that love isn't defined by genetics. It's defined by presence, by choice, by the courage to claim what's yours. And if you're new here or just stopping by, hit subscribe. I've got more stories, honest ones, messy ones, stories about love, identity, motherhood loss, and the unexpected ways we rebuild. Thank you for listening.